Handlebars, stems, grips, brake levers, gear shifters, seat post shifters, and of course that critical mode control button. Your cockpit can soon become a zone of heavy traffic. Here's to get the best out of your cockpit area on your e-bike. Okay, handlebar width. Now they range between about 680 millimeters up to about 800 millimeters. Now think about it as your handlebar width is equivalent to your shoulders. So narrow shoulders, narrow handlebars, wide shoulders, wide handlebars. Also, by having a larger handlebar, it does tend to kind of give you a bit more space if your bike is a little bit too small for you. So yeah, think of it as a press up. You don't really do press ups kind of with your arms narrow, you do them kind of out here. If you need to experiment with your handlebar width, you can simply do that by moving your grip a little bit further out on your handlebar. You know, not much, do it like in 10 millimeters at a time each side on it. So that's a good way to kind of work out what your optimum handlebar width is. Right, let's talk about handlebar height, or indeed the rise of your handlebar. Now this varies from about 10 millimeters, which is quite a shallow profile, up to about 40 millimeters. Now the optimum height of your handlebar depends on several factors. Obviously your shape, your frame size, your wheel size, and critically the head tube length of your bike. What you're trying to do is actually get an equal distribution of weight between the front tire and the rear tire. And having your handlebar high or low is going to have a big impact on that. For example, if you have your handlebar quite high, that's going to push your weight further back. Whereas if you have your handlebar quite low, that's going to put more weight on the front tire. Now, over the years, I've kind of worked out my kind of optimum height for my handlebar, and it happens to be about 42.5 inches from the outside of the handlebar to the floor. And that's irrespective of what I'm going to travel or what frame size I'm actually riding. Right, let's talk about a few dimensions on handlebars. One is the diameter. Now, they've generally come in either 35 millimeter or 31.8. Moving on from that is the up sweep, about 5 degrees, and then the back sweep, which, you know, I generally like about a 7-degree back sweep. So if you look on all the manufacturers' websites, they'll show you those dimensions. If you're within kind of 5 up sweep and 7 back sweep, you're on a good thing. Now, whilst we can talk about handlebar widths and heights and up sweep and back sweep, how you actually run your handlebar and your stem is actually quite critical, because if you look at this, you can have from a forward position to a rearward position is about 3 to 4 inches. Now that could be the difference between like a size small bike and a size extra large bike. Now, if you run your handlebar quite far forwards, that's going to put quite a lot of weight onto the front tire. Whereas if you run it quite far back, that's going to put more weight over the rear. Like I said, it's quite personal. Someone like Troy Brosnan runs his handlebars like 740 mil and runs them quite far back. Whereas like a rider such as Aaron Gwyn runs his handlebars quite far forward. So like I said, it's actually quite a personal thing. Right, materials is worth talking about. You can go for alloy, carbon or titanium bars. Now obviously the price difference is quite massive between kind of alloy and titanium, which is going up into like £200–300. Critically, what you're looking for is a good stiffness to flex balance on the bike. What you do not want is a handlebar that's too stiff on your e-bike. So yeah, obviously it varies between brands. But I think to wrap up on handlebars, in general on an e-bike, I'd go for about 10 millimeter higher and slightly wider, maybe kind of 10 millimeter wider than you would normally do on a non-e-bike. Grips, an irrelevant part of the e-bike? Not in the slightest. They'll have a huge impact on your comfort, fatigue and control on the bike. Let's go through some of the detail of handlebar grips. Right, let's talk about the length of your grip. Now obviously this depends on the size of your hand. You can have, you know, small hands, narrow grips, big hands, bigger grips. But in general, you're looking at about 120, 130 millimeters, but that's just the soft rubber part of the grip. It doesn't include the collars which lock that grip onto your handlebar. Why this is important is because you don't really want to be riding on a metal exterior, because that's going to lead to quite a bit of fatigue on the outside of your hand, especially on longer rides. Right, let's take a minute to explore the compounds of different grips. Yeah, and just like tires, They vary in their compound and their tackiness. You can get, some brands have actually got 4 different compounds of grip, from super tacky through the mid-range and up to hard compound grips. Now, what grip do you choose? Well, it depends actually on the climate you live in. If you live in a hot, dry climate, then maybe a harder grip might work. Although you need to bear in mind that some harder grips tend to sweat a lot, and that leads to like a lot of movement on the grip in those conditions. What else you need to think about, do you actually ride with gloves, or are you kind of gloveless rider? I think if you're a rider without gloves, you should go for the softer compound because there's less abrasion on your hands. Another thing you might want to take into account is that same as tires, these soft compound grips are going to wear out at a far higher rate than a harder grip. So how do you fasten your grips to your handlebar? Well, in the old days, people used to slide the grip on with a bit of petrol and let it dry. However, luckily these days we have the lock-on, which are collars on the end of your grips. Now, early days, there was like 2 collars on each side of the grip. Which is like super kind of safe. However, it's a little bit unnecessary. And the added impact of that was that your hand used to kind of ride on this part of your palm, which led to a lot of fatigue, especially on longer rides. So I think these days we go for the single lock-on, and just make sure when you get your grip that lock-on is on the inside of the grip and not on the outside. Right, let's talk about grip diameter. Now, normally they come in regular or slim versions. Does it really matter? Well, yes, it does, particularly on the comfort and fatigue of your ride. Now, some people think that grip diameter affects arm pump. That's not quite the case. That's brought about by frame size and geometry. However, in terms of diameter, you can go into a bike shop and you can try out the different width grips and see what works for you. So let's talk about the pattern on your grips. Now, some manufacturers like to have their name on the grip, loads of colors, different shapes, but ultimately I think it comes down to whether you've got a waffle or a non-waffle pattern. Why is that important? Well, it definitely acts as an anchor in wet or sticky, humid conditions. So yeah, I think that wraps up grips. Several things to think about, like I mentioned, the lock-on or non-lock-on, the waffle or non-waffle, and of course, the compound of the grip. Stems, hugely personal, but nevertheless a key part of the frame's geometry. It's actually the stem that allows you to get the fit right of your bike, that fine tuning in the cockpit area. They come in various shapes and sizes, and also they allow you to raise or lower your handlebar position, or indeed make you kind of stretch your bike out or kind of shorten the cockpit area. Main different types of stem. There is a kind of neutral stem, which has no rise or fall. You have a riser stem, which kind of goes up slightly, or indeed you have a negative stem, which is kind of downward facing. Now, they also come in various lengths. You can get a 20mm up to 120mm and beyond. Now, they actually have a big effect on the steering of your bike. If you take someone like Aaron Gwyn, kind of the World Cup downhill champion, he runs a 35mm stem in his bike, whereas Sam Gaze, the recent winner of the World Cup cross country in Stellenbosch, he actually runs a dropper, 24-degree dropper with 130mm length. So big variety depending on the type of riding you do. So in general, the shorter stems lead to sharper steering, whereas the longer stems go to slower steering. Now, Sam Gaze is actually a good case in point. What he's done to his Specialized bike is put a 130mm stem up front, slid the seat back in the rails, which increases his cockpit area. Now, the 130mm stem's got a dropper to it, which means he can get right over the front of that bike on the climbs, and obviously the seat in the back means you can position himself for more grip on the back tyre. But that's a World Cup cross-country rider. With e-bikes, it's more of a kind of all-round ride. You're going to be doing a lot more descending, a lot more climbing. It's quite a specific cockpit area they need in an e-bike. And in general, I think that 50mm stem, neutral stem, is a really good starting point for an e-bike. Now, wrapping up, here's a really good example of a neutral bar and stem combination. We've got a 27mm riser bar with a 6mm rise stem in 50mm, and as you can see, it's in a central position on the fork steer, which means you can either raise or lower that to get the kind of optimum shape of your cockpit area. Brake lever position is quite a personal thing. There are some practical considerations to bear in mind depending on the type of terrain you're riding. whether you're going uphill or downhill. For example, if you're spending all day going up hills, then your lever position needs to be quite aggressively pointing downwards so that when you're over the front of the bike, your arm and your hand is in a quite straight line. However, if you're descending all day, then it needs to be a far more kind of horizontal position, maybe gently dipping downwards. So for example, you can back on the bike, and then again, that handlebar, that arm and hand is in a straight position. What you don't want to be doing on a downhill situation is have your levers pointing downwards, so then you're going to have to actually reach around your bar to try and get hold of your brake levers. Now, how you set your lever position laterally largely depends on your braking technique. For example, if you use your index finger for braking, that finger needs to be on the outside edge of the lever to get maximum braking power. And in that position, you need to be generally about 20 to 25 millimeters from the outside edge of the grip. Now, if you use two-finger braking, you generally need to kind of bring your clamp closer towards the grip so you can get your both fingers on that lever. So if you use your middle finger to brake, then you need to again have the clamp closer towards the grip than you would if you're using your index finger. In fact, using your middle finger is a good technique to use, and it's good to be able to kind of mix between using your index finger and your middle finger, especially on those longer descents. One thing to finally talk about with braking is the bite point. That is the point at maximum power of your brake. Now, this is personal again. Some riders like to have very little movement on their brake lever when they're braking. So it goes from maybe sort of full extension to like 10 mil and you got maximum power. Whereas a lot of pro downhill racers, they tend to kind of brake where the outside of the lever actually goes to your knuckles, and it's only at that point as you get maximum power at the brake. So finally, some 3 positional things to talk about in this heavy traffic cockpit area. You've got your gear shifter, your mode button, and also your seat dropper if you've got one of those. So in terms of the gear shifter, just make sure that when you're braking, it doesn't interfere with your knuckle. On some shifters, you can move it inboards or outboards to kind of fine tune that area. The seat dropper is quite the same. Just bear in mind that when you're kind of climbing and descending, that kind of position needs to be really fine tuned for your kind of ride dynamic. And of course, finally, your mode and display button. That's probably going to be the most frequently used button on your bike. So the closer to your kind of thumb, the better in that respect. So to summarize the setting up of the cockpit area on your e-bike, there's some hardware things to think about, such as the handlebar, the stem, and the grips. Then there's the more positional elements, your gear shifter, that seat dropper lever position, and of course that all-important mode display button. Get them all right, fine tune them, and it'll definitely improve the ride experience of your e-bike. So I hope you like this video. If you want to check out Are E-Bikes Fast, click over here. And a more in-depth look at the buyer's guide, kind of how much suspension travel do you need, kind of materials, geometry, just click over here. Yeah, but don't forget to give us a thumbs up, and of course, please click here to subscribe.